I like it because I know one thing for certain is that if you do get married, you must commit yourself to that.
Richard loved one woman for more than 50 years. She married his closest friend, then married again later, and years after that she passed away while he was holding her hand. He never married, never had children, and instead poured everything into music, smiling on stage while carrying one of the deepest heartbreaks in British music history. Long before the police ever stepped into his life, something else had already shaken him to his core. When authorities searched his home in 2014, it wasn't the first time he felt torn apart. A quiet agreement between broadcasters and officials had already set events in motion. Claims were made that later proved to be false, but the impact was devastating. He lost weight, struggled with illness, barely slept, and said his own home no longer felt safe. The man who once filled Wembley Stadium suddenly felt afraid to step outside. He entered the world on October 14, 1940, at King George's Hospital in Lucknow, British India, born as Harry Roger Webb at a time when the world itself felt unstable. A global war was underway, and political unrest surrounded everyday life. By the mid-1940s, tensions erupted into riots, and British families began leaving the only homes they had ever known. The Webb family was among them. Harry's father worked within the colonial system, but by 1948 it was clear that everything was changing. They didn't leave by plane or car, but aboard a slow, crowded ship crossing the Indian Ocean. The SS Ranchi carried hundreds of families away from familiar lives into uncertainty. For 3 long weeks, they shared cramped spaces and anxious conversations, sailing toward a future none of them could fully imagine. England felt like another planet. Cold streets, rationing, gray skies, and a small house replaced the warmth and space Harry once knew. It was a difficult adjustment, but it shaped him. That journey planted a quiet determination inside him, a need to rise above circumstances and create something meaningful. Over time, Harry Webb began to disappear, and a new identity started to take shape. A sharp-eyed talent manager suggested a name that sounded strong and unforgettable. Cliff, solid and unmistakable. Richard, inspired by the energy of American rock pioneers. With that, Cliff Richard was born, and British music would never be the same. In August 1958, a song called Move It was released. It sounded raw, energetic, and bold, completely different from the polite pop dominating the airwaves. Cliff was just 18 years old, and the song shot to number 2 on the charts. For the first time, British teenagers had a rock star of their own. He wasn't copying anyone. He was opening doors. The excitement was electric. When he toured that same year, crowds went wild. Fans screamed, cried, and overwhelmed venues. Security struggled to keep order. Newspapers called it Cliff hysteria, and the country had never seen anything like it. The following year, he released Living Doll, a song he personally doubted. He thought it felt too gentle, but once reworked, it became a massive success, holding the top spot for weeks and selling hundreds of thousands of copies. One hit followed another, and suddenly Cliff was everywhere. Films came next, and he chose roles that surprised people, tackling serious themes and showing he wanted to grow beyond the image of a teenage idol. By the early 1960s, his films and soundtracks dominated charts and box offices alike. Songs from Summer Holiday became instant classics, and the film itself became one of the biggest British releases of its time. When the Beatles emerged, many assumed Cliff's moment would fade. Instead, he stood his ground. Even at the height of Beatlemania, his songs continued climbing the charts. Members of the Beatles themselves later admitted that Cliff had already conquered Britain before they left to find their sound elsewhere. In 1965, readers of a major music magazine voted Cliff the world's top male singer, ahead of global icons. It wasn't because he chased trends, but because he stayed true to himself while quietly evolving. Then, in 1966, something unexpected happened. On stage at a major gathering, Cliff spoke openly about his faith. It shocked fans and industry insiders alike. Pop stars weren't supposed to talk about belief or inner life. Many thought his career was finished. Some expected him to walk away from music entirely. For a moment, even Cliff wondered if that might be true. But instead of leaving, he stayed, and in doing so, created a new path. He showed that personal belief and public success didn't have to cancel each other out. That honesty gave him a confidence he had never felt before. The pressure to perform an image disappeared, and his music became stronger because of it. By the mid-1970s, his chart presence faded, and people whispered that his time was over. Then, in 1976, he released Devil Woman, a darker, edgier track that reintroduced him to a new generation. It became a major hit both in the UK and the US, selling millions of copies. Even rock legends took notice, publicly supporting his comeback. This wasn't nostalgia. It was reinvention. He continued proving his staying power through the 1980s, releasing albums that sounded modern without chasing fads. In 1988, a holiday song filled with warmth and reflection climbed to #1 and stayed there, becoming the biggest single of the year. Decades later, it was still beloved. In 1989, he released his 100th single, something no other British artist had ever done. That same year, he filled Wembley Stadium once again, delivering a concert that celebrated his past while proving he still belonged in the present. Recognition followed. Awards, records, and historic milestones stacked up. 5 decades, 5 chart-topping eras. Yet behind the success, his personal life held quieter stories. One of the most important was his lifelong bond with Olivia Newton-John. They met when she was young, and their connection was immediate and lasting. They performed together for decades, their voices blending effortlessly. What the public didn't know for years was how deeply Cliff felt for her. Circumstances and timing kept them on different paths, but their friendship endured until the end. Their final performance together became a tribute that still moves fans today. In 2014, everything changed in a way no one expected. While Cliff was away, he turned on the television and saw helicopters hovering over his home as authorities searched it, all broadcast live. A private moment was turned into spectacle. Images traveled around the world before facts were confirmed. The shock was overwhelming. The stress took a severe toll on his health and sense of safety. Eventually, the claims collapsed under scrutiny. No charges were ever brought. Yet the damage had already been done. Years later, a court ruled that his privacy had been violated and that the coverage was wrong. The case changed how media could report similar situations in the future. Cliff won legally, but emotionally, the scars remained. He spoke openly about how the experience affected his trust, his health, and how he saw the world. What hurt most wasn't just the ordeal itself, but the idea that suspicion lingers longer than truth. Through it all, he continued to stand, not because it was easy, but because walking away would have meant letting the noise define him. His story isn't just about fame or music. It's about endurance, reinvention, loyalty, and the quiet strength it takes to keep going when the world misunderstands you. Even after everything, he kept singing, not to prove anything, but because music was the one place where his voice had always been free. As the years moved forward, Cliff didn't chase attention anymore. He didn't need to. His legacy was already written into the fabric of British culture. His songs had played through living rooms, car radios, weddings, holidays, and quiet evenings for generations. Parents who once screamed at his concerts now watched their children discover his music for the first time. That kind of longevity doesn't come from hype. It comes from trust. People trusted Cliff because he never pretended to be something he wasn't for long. When he realized he was playing a role, he stepped out of it. When the world changed, he adapted without losing himself. He also learned the power of silence. For someone whose life had been spent on stages and screens, silence became a form of healing. He spent more time walking, reading, reflecting, and surrounding himself with a smaller circle of people who knew him as Harry as much as they knew him as Cliff. Fame had once been loud and intoxicating, but peace was quiet, and he grew to value that more than applause. Music, however, never left him. Even when he wasn't touring or releasing major albums, he kept recording, experimenting, and collaborating. Not for charts, but for joy. He worked with orchestras, revisited old songs with new arrangements, and allowed his voice to age naturally rather than fight time. His later recordings carried something his early hits didn't yet have: lived experience. Every note held decades of loss, love, faith, disappointment, and resilience. Fans noticed the difference. They said his voice sounded warmer, more human. It wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about truth. When he stepped on stage in later years, there was no need for big gestures or flashy moves. He would simply stand there, smile gently, and sing. And that was enough. People didn't come to see a pop star frozen in time. They came to see a man who had lived, fallen, stood back up, and kept going. One of the most remarkable things about Cliff's journey is how little bitterness he carried, despite having every reason to hold on to it. He spoke openly about pain, but rarely with anger. He believed that holding on to resentment would only give more power to what had already hurt him. That mindset didn't erase the past, but it allowed him to move forward without being chained to it. He also became more open about vulnerability. Earlier in his career, he felt pressure to appear confident and unshakable. Later, he admitted that confidence had often been an act. With age, he learned that strength didn't come from never breaking, but from being honest when you did. That honesty deepened his connection with fans more than any hit record ever could. Cliff's life also became a reminder that success doesn't follow a straight line. There were peaks where everything seemed effortless, and valleys where it felt like the world had moved on. Yet every time people assumed his chapter was finished, he found a way back, not by copying others, but by leaning into who he truly was. That ability to return again and again is what separates legends from moments. His influence stretched far beyond his own records. Many artists who came after him saw his career as proof that longevity was possible, that you didn't have to burn out young to matter. That reinvention didn't mean erasing your past. It meant building on it, quietly, steadily, honestly. Even in his personal life, Cliff embraced simplicity. He never filled the empty spaces with distractions just to keep up appearances. He accepted that some chapters remain unfinished, that some loves stay unspoken, and that not every story needs a traditional ending to be meaningful. His bond with Olivia remained one of the purest connections of his life, defined not by what could have been, but by what was: loyalty, warmth, and mutual respect. When she was gone, he didn't try to replace that connection. He honored it by remembering it. As time passed, Cliff also became more reflective about legacy. Not in terms of numbers or awards, but in terms of impact. He often said that if his music had helped someone through a difficult moment, then it had done its job. That belief guided his choices more than industry trends ever did. He continued to support causes close to his heart, using his platform not for noise, but for good. Quiet generosity became part of who he was. Many of his contributions were never announced, never publicized, because he didn't believe kindness needed an audience. In interviews, when asked how he wanted to be remembered, Cliff rarely spoke about fame. He spoke about integrity, about doing his best with the opportunities he was given, about staying true to himself even when that choice cost him popularity or comfort. That consistency, over more than 6 decades, is what truly defines his life. Looking back, it's impossible to separate the man from the music, yet it's equally impossible to reduce him to just songs. Cliff Richard became a symbol of something deeper: perseverance without bitterness, faith without performance, success without arrogance. In an industry known for extremes, he chose balance. And perhaps that is why his story still resonates. Not because it was perfect, but because it was human. He experienced joy and loss, celebration and isolation, admiration and misunderstanding. He stood in stadiums filled with cheering fans, and he sat alone with doubts that no one else could hear. Through it all, he kept moving forward. In the end, Cliff didn't conquer time by staying young. He did it by allowing himself to grow older with grace. His voice changed, the world changed, the industry changed, but the core of who he was never did. And that is why, even now, when one of his songs begins to play, people don't just hear music. They hear memories, comfort, and a voice that refused to be silenced by circumstance. He kept singing not because the world demanded it, but because it was the truest way he knew how to live.